Welcome to this peaceful telling of an ancient story. This is a place for rest, for quiet listening, for letting the day slowly fade as we journey together through the pages of Scripture. There is nothing here that requires your attention or effort, only a story gently told to accompany you toward sleep. In the beginning of things, after the waters had receded and the earth had dried, after the great flood had passed and Noah's descendants had begun to spread across the land, there came a time when all the people of the earth spoke the same language. One language, one set of words, one understanding between them. When a man spoke to his neighbor understood. When a woman called to her children, they knew her meaning. When travelers met on the road, they greeted one another with words that needed no translation, no interpreter standing between them. It was a world of shared words and shared meanings. The people multiplied across the land. They had children, and their children had children. And the earth began to fill once more with human voices, all speaking in the same tongue. For a time, these people journeyed from place to place, following the seasons, seeking pasture for their flocks, finding water for their herds. They were wanderers, as their fathers had been, moving across the face of the earth beneath the wide sky. And as they journeyed from the east, they came to a plain. It was a broad plain, flat and wide, stretching out in all directions. The land was level there, unmarked by hills or valleys, open and spacious. The soil was rich, the ground was firm. Water ran through channels nearby. This plain was in the land of Shinar, in a region that would later be known by many names, a place where great rivers flowed. It was ancient land, old even then. When the people saw this plain, they stopped their wandering. They looked at the level ground, at the rich soil, at the open space that seemed to stretch forever. They looked at one another and saw that they were many, that their numbers had grown, that they were capable. And they said to one another, "Let us settle here." So they settled on the plain of Shinar. They stopped journeying, stopped wandering, and made this place their home. They put down their traveling packs. They gathered their families. They began to build. In that ancient time, in that part of the world, there was not much stone suitable for building. The land was alluvial, formed by rivers depositing soil over countless years. The earth was soft and workable, but it did not yield the hard rock that makes for lasting walls. But the people were resourceful. They had learned many things since the days of their fathers, and one of them said, "Come, let us make bricks." It was a simple idea. If the earth would not give them stone, they would make their own. They would take the clay from the ground and shape it with their hands and heat it in fire until it became strong. So they began to make bricks. They dug clay from the earth, soft, wet, and yielding. They mixed it with water and straw, working it with their hands until it was smooth. They pressed it into molds, forming rectangular shapes, uniform and stackable. They laid these shapes in rows under the sun, letting them dry slowly in the warmth of the day. And when the clay had dried, they built fires and burned the bricks, heating them until they were hard. The fires glowed in the night, tended carefully. The smell of burning clay filled the air. The heat shimmered and danced. Brick by brick, they created their building material. Brick by brick, they prepared to build something lasting, But bricks alone do not make a building. Bricks must be held together, joined one to another, or they will simply collapse. The people knew this. They had seen walls fall. They needed mortar. They needed something to bind the bricks together. In other lands, people might use lime mortar or mud mortar. But here, on this plain, the people had discovered something else. They had found that tar seeped up from the ground in certain places, thick, black, and sticky. This tar, this bitumen as it would later be called, was a gift of the earth. It bubbled up from deep below, collecting in pools. The people learned to gather it, to heat it, to use it as mortar between their bricks. It was strong, this tar. It was waterproof. It held firmly and lasted long. So they said to one another, "Let us use tar for mortar." And they did. They heated the tar until it was soft. They spread it between the bricks, thick and binding. They built with care, laying brick upon brick, row upon row, binding everything together with the black tar that held fast. The work progressed steadily. Day after day, the people labored. The sound of their work filled the plain, the clink of brick on brick, the scrape of mortar being spread, the voices of workers calling to one another in their shared language, coordinating their efforts. They were pleased with what they were creating. They looked at the bricks they had made and saw that they were good. They looked at the structures beginning to rise and felt satisfaction. And as they worked, an idea began to form among them. An ambition began to grow. They had settled on this plain. They had learned to make bricks and mortar. They had skills and knowledge and unity. They spoke one language and understood one another completely. They were capable of great things. They could build something magnificent. They could create something that would last. They could make a name for themselves that would echo through all generations. The idea spread among them. They gathered together and spoke of it. They planned and dreamed. Their voices rose with excitement, and they said to one another, "Come, let us build ourselves a city." Not just houses, not just shelters, a city, a great city with walls and streets and buildings, a place of permanence, a place that would stand as a testament to what they could accomplish together. But more than a city, something more ambitious still. "Let us build a tower," they said, "a tower that reaches to the heavens." A tower, a great tower, taller than anything built before. A structure that would rise up and up, climbing toward the sky. A monument to human achievement. They imagined it rising from the plain, dominating the landscape, visible from vast distances. They imagined travelers seeing it from far away and marveling. They imagined future generations looking up at it in wonder. With a tower that reaches to the heavens, they said, we will make a name for ourselves. A name, reputation, renown. They wanted to be remembered. They wanted their achievements to echo through time. They wanted the world to know what they had done, to speak of them with admiration. And there was something else in their planning, something more than ambition. There was fear. "Let us build this city and this tower," they said, "so that we will not be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." They feared dispersion. They feared being separated from one another. They feared losing their unity, their collective identity. They wanted to stay together, to remain one people, powerful in their togetherness. So they made their plan. They would build a city and a tower. They would create something that would anchor them to this place, something so magnificent that they would never need to leave. They would build high and build strong, and their unity would be preserved. The work began in earnest. They organized themselves efficiently. Some made bricks, some gathered tar, some carried materials, some laid the foundations. Everyone had a role. The foundation of the tower was vast. It had to be wide and strong to support the enormous height they envisioned. They dug into the earth and laid the first courses of brick and tar, building the base solid and true. Then they began to build upward. Layer by layer the tower grew, brick upon brick, row upon row, rising slowly but steadily toward the sky. The work required coordination and skill. The bricks had to be carried up as the tower grew taller. The mortar had to be mixed and applied. The walls had to be built straight. They worked in shifts, some laboring while others rested. The work continued from sunrise to sunset, day after day, week after week. The tower climbed higher. Around the tower, the city grew as well. Buildings were constructed, streets were laid out, walls were erected. The city took shape according to their plans, organized and orderly. The people were united in their purpose. They spoke the same language, understood the same goals, worked toward the same end. There was no confusion among them. Every word was clear. Every instruction was followed. And the tower rose higher. It was impressive, this tower. It was ambitious beyond anything attempted before. The people looked up at it as it grew and felt pride in their hearts. They were doing something remarkable. They were achieving something great. But they were building in their own strength. They were working from their own plans. They were seeking their own glory. They had not consulted the Lord. They had not asked for His blessing. They were building for themselves, to make a name for themselves, to reach toward heaven through their own effort. The tower continued to rise brick by brick, reaching upward into the sky, and the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the children of men were building. The Lord who is everywhere, who sees all things. The Lord who had created the heavens and the earth, who had formed mankind from the dust to the ground. The Lord who had preserved Noah and his family, who had made a covenant with all living creatures, who had set the rainbow in the sky as a sign of His promise. The Lord came down to see what was being built on the plain of Shinar. He saw the city taking shape. He saw the tower rising toward the heavens. He saw the unity of the people, their shared language, their coordinated effort. And the Lord saw the human heart behind it all. He saw the pride. He saw the ambition. He saw the desire for glory and reputation on human terms alone. He saw people building to make themselves great, to establish themselves, to reach toward the divine through their own power. The Lord saw not just what they were doing, but what they would do if left unchecked. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they all have one language. This is only the beginning of what they will do, and now nothing that they propose to do will be impossible for them." It was an observation of capability. United by one language, coordinated in their efforts, the people could accomplish much. This tower was only the beginning. If they continued on this path, driven by pride, they would attempt greater and greater things, always building in their own strength, always seeking their own glory. It was not good for humanity to continue on this path. It was not good for them to build united only in pride. It was not good for them to seek to reach heaven through their own efforts. There was mercy in what the Lord was about to do, though it would not seem like mercy at first. There was protection in it, protection from the consequences of unchecked pride. And the Lord said, "Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so that they will not understand one another's speech. Come, let us go down." The words echoed the words of the people themselves, for they had said, "Come, let us build." Now the Lord said, "Come, let us go down." The Lord would confuse their language. He would introduce diversity where there had been uniformity. He would create boundaries of understanding where there had been perfect communication. And so it happened. One day, as the work continued, as bricks were being laid and mortar was being spread, as instructions were being called out, something changed. A worker called out for more bricks in words that suddenly sounded strange to those who heard. Another gave instructions that suddenly made no sense. A mason asked for mortar and received a blank stare of incomprehension. The language that had been one became many. The words that had meant one thing now meant something else, or meant nothing at all to those hearing them. The sounds that had been understood were now just sounds, meaningless and confusing. The bewilderment was complete. A man speaks to his neighbor as he has spoken 1,000 times before, and suddenly his neighbor does not understand. He tries again, using different words, speaking more slowly, but the confusion only deepens. His neighbor responds, but the response is gibberish, meaningless syllables that convey nothing. A woman calls to her children, and some understand while others do not. A family finds that they can speak among themselves, but cannot communicate with the family working beside them. A group of workers discovers they share understanding, but the group next to them speaks in sounds that make no sense. The work came to a halt. How could they continue? How could they coordinate when they could no longer understand one another? The mason could not tell the brickmaker what was needed. The engineer could not explain the design. The overseer could not give instructions. Everything fell into confusion. They tried to communicate through gestures, through pointing and miming. But complex ideas cannot be conveyed through gestures alone. Building a tower requires language, requires the ability to explain and instruct through words. The tower stood unfinished, its top courses incomplete, its uppermost layers rough. The work simply stopped. The ambitious project came to a halt in confusion. And as the confusion deepened, the people began to separate. They gravitated toward those who spoke as they spoke. They gathered with those they could understand. They formed groups based on shared language, families and clans clustering together while unable to communicate with others. The unity that had driven the project dissolved. The singular purpose fractured into many purposes. The one people became many peoples, divided by the languages they now spoke. And the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth. The very thing they had feared came to pass. The very thing they had tried to prevent through their building happened. They were scattered. They were dispersed. They spread out across the earth, group by group, language by language, each going their own way. But this scattering was not punishment alone. it was also the fulfillment of the original blessing. Back in the beginning, the Lord had told humanity to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. After the flood, he had repeated this commission to Noah and his descendants. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. The people had resisted this. They had wanted to stay in one place, to remain unified on their own terms, to build a name for themselves, rather than to spread abroad as the Lord had intended. Now, through the confusion of languages, the scattering happened. The earth was filled, not through proud concentration in one place, but through dispersion across many places. The nations were formed, each with its own language, each with its own territory, each going forth to fulfill the ancient commission in ways they had not chosen. They stopped building the city. There was no point in continuing. The coordination required was impossible now. The shared vision had dissolved. The materials remained, the bricks were there, the tar was ready, but the unity needed to complete the work was gone. The tower stood unfinished, a monument not to human achievement, but to human pride and its limitations. Its incomplete top reached toward the sky, but it would reach no farther. The dream of building to the heavens remained unfulfilled, and the place was called Babel. Babel, from a word that sounded like the word for confusion. Babel, where the language was confused. Babel, where human ambition met divine intervention. The name itself became a reminder. Whenever it was spoken, whenever the story was told, the name Babel called to mind the confusion, the scattering, the limits of human pride. From Babel, the peoples went forth. Each language group traveled in its own direction. Some went north into the mountains. Some went south toward other rivers and valleys. Some went west toward the Great Sea. Some went east toward distant lands. They carried with them their language, their customs, their memories of the plain of Shinar and the tower that was never finished. They established themselves in new lands. They built new cities, smaller perhaps, more humble perhaps, but built in new places. And in their scattering, diversity was born. Different languages led to different ways of thinking. Different lands led to different ways of living. The one humanity became many humanities, diverse and varied, spread across the face of the earth. It was not what they had planned. It was not what they had wanted. But that is what happened. And in the quiet of the night, in the stillness when the work had stopped and the confusion had settled into acceptance, perhaps some of them understood. Perhaps some of them saw that their ambition had been too great, their pride too high. Perhaps some of them recognized that building toward heaven in their own strength was never going to work. Perhaps some of them learned humility on the plain of Shinar. Perhaps some of them learned to seek the Lord's will rather than their own glory. Perhaps some of them carried these lessons with them as they scattered, teaching their children about the tower that was never finished and the language that was confused. The tower remained, standing incomplete. Over time, the elements worked on it. Rain fell on the bricks. Wind eroded the mortar. The tar that had held so strong began to crack and crumble. The tower that was meant to last forever slowly succumbed to time and weather. But the story lasted. The story was passed down from generation to generation. The story was told around campfires and in tents, in villages and in cities, wherever people gathered and wondered about why there are so many languages, why humanity is scattered across the earth. And the story reminded them. It reminded them of the danger of pride. It reminded them that reaching for heaven must be done with humility, not ambition. It reminded them that the Lord sees all things and acts to protect humanity from its own impulses. The plain of Shinar grew quiet. The noise of building faded. The workers were gone, scattered to the four winds. The tower stood alone, and in the silence there was peace. There was the peace that comes when striving ceases. There was the peace that comes when ambition gives way to acceptance. There was the peace that comes when humans stop trying to reach heaven through their own efforts and simply rest. The stars came out over the plain of Shinar, the same stars that had looked down on the garden in Eden, the same stars that had watched the flood and the ark, the same stars that would watch over all the generations to come. They shone with quiet light, marking the heavens that the tower had tried to reach, the heavens that remained far above, beautiful and distant. And the earth turned slowly in its courses, carrying day into night and night into day, season following season. The peoples scattered from Babel continued on their journeys. They built their cities and lived their lives and told their stories. They developed their languages and their cultures. Some of them remembered the Lord. Some of them forgot. Some of them sought him. Some of them turned away. But all of them carried with them the consequence of Babel, the diversity of language, the division of humanity into nations and peoples. And in later times, much later times, there would come a day when the confusion of Babel would be answered, when the Spirit would descend and people of many languages would each hear and understand the same message, when unity would be restored not through shared ambition, but through shared grace. But that is far in the future. For now, on the plain of Shinar, there was only the unfinished tower and the quiet land and the memory of what had happened there. The story of Babel is a story of limits. It is about the boundaries of human pride. It is about the Lord who sees, acts, and redirects human history according to his purposes. But it is also a story of mercy. It is mercy to stop humanity from going too far down a path of pride. It is mercy to scatter people across the earth to fulfill the original commission. It is mercy to confuse language before the tower could be completed, before the pride could grow even greater. The Tower of Babel was never meant to be finished. It was meant to be a lesson, a reminder, a story told to every generation that would come after. And now, thousands of years later, the lesson remains. The reminder still speaks. Build not in pride, but in humility. Seek not your own glory, but the Lord's will. Reach not for heaven through your own strength, but receive heaven's grace with open hands. Remember that great achievements mean nothing if they are built on pride rather than service. Remember Babel. Remember the confusion. Remember the scattering. Remember the tower that reached toward heaven but never arrived. And remember that the Lord sees all things. He knows when we build in pride. He knows when our ambitions grow too large. He knows when we need correction. And he acts not in anger but in mercy, not to destroy but to protect, not to harm but to guide us back to the path we were always meant to walk. The night is quiet now. The story has been told. The tower stands in memory, unfinished and alone on the plain of Shinar, a monument to human pride and divine mercy, to confusion and scattering, to the limits of human achievement and the boundless wisdom of the Lord. Rest now in this quiet. Rest in the knowledge that the Lord sees and knows and acts with wisdom and mercy. Rest in the understanding that our striving is not what brings us to heaven, that our building does not reach the divine. Rest in humility. Rest in peace. Rest in the gentle understanding that we are not meant to reach heaven through towers of brick and tar, but through surrender, grace, and the Lord's invitation to come home. The stars still shine over the plain of Shinar. The wind still whispers through the ruins of the unfinished tower. And somewhere in the quiet night, there is peace for those who cease their striving and rest in the Lord's mercy. Sleep now. Let the story of Babel settle into your heart, not as judgment, but as gentle correction, not as condemnation, but as invitation. An invitation to humility, an invitation to trust, an invitation to stop trying to make a name for yourself and instead receive the name the Lord has given you, beloved, known, seen. The tower is unfinished, but you are complete in Him. The languages are confused, but His voice speaks clearly to your heart. The people are scattered, but you are gathered in His care. Rest now. The story is over. The night is quiet. And the Lord who came down to see the tower is the same Lord who sees you now with mercy and wisdom and unfailing love. Rest. Be still. Be at peace. The story of Babel ends in confusion, yes, but it also ends in the beginning of something new. The nations spreading across the earth, diverse and varied, each carrying the image of the Creator, each called to fill the earth not with monuments to human pride, but with the quiet, faithful living of humble lives. And that is enough. That has always been enough. Rest now. Sleep in peace. And may the Lord who scattered the builders of Babel gather you close in His mercy and keep you safe through the quiet hours of the night. Amen.